All right, let's get started. Here we have Jan Philippi. Jan actually reached out to me and he wanted to do a podcast about the mental game. It was such a coincidence because I was already looking to do something like that. And when I looked into some of the stuff that Jan had been doing in the past, I thought it was a perfect fit because I want to talk about the range of topics that we're going to talk about today, but what better way than to talk about it with someone that has a background in this. So Jan has a background in psychology. So yeah, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and how you got into poker and how that transitioned to what you're doing now?
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I think slowly but surely the mental game is becoming more important in poker, but I would say like the majority, even of professionals, is not taking it too seriously yet. But I think that's slowly but steadily changing. And it definitely wasn't something that I was taking very seriously in the beginning of my poker career. So I got started 2006. Like in the early days when everything was still easy. But at the same time, I already did study psychology. Like it was kind of a coincidence that I did get started at around the same time. And in the beginning of my poker career, like my mental game was, to be honest, really, really bad. In the first few years, the game was so easy, the games were so soft that it didn't really matter. But after the first 2 years, I was in tough games for the first time in my life. I had the first really bad downswing of my career and I wasn't able to deal with that. So I started getting a little bit into these topics, for example, meditation. I think the very first thing I ever did to improve my mental game was listening to a podcast where they talked about how mindfulness helps poker players. At some point, like after years and years of playing and not being able to deal with downswings and bad beats and the unhealthy lifestyle as well, I was really burned out at some point. I didn't enjoy poker anymore. I wasn't playing well anymore. I quit poker in order to finish my studies, in order to write my diploma thesis. And then I didn't play poker for like 2 years because I was starting my professional life. But at some point I got back into the games. And then all of a sudden I realized how massive the difference was in my approach to 2 years prior. I was way better at dealing with the downswings. And that's when I realized, okay, if I can change it, then other players can do that as well. And I was in coaching and training already. I realized poker players would be the ideal clients. I know what it's like to be a poker player. I know all the stress and all the craziness that comes with it. And I learned not only in theory, but only in my own personal practice, the tools to deal with that lifestyle and the crazy ups and downs.
For sure. I think like what you described, like that whole progression mentally and feeling frustrated, all poker players can relate to that so well. For example, for me recently, like what a great timing that we're talking about this topic, because like for me personally, I've been away from poker for about a year during the pandemic. And I found that for me, stepping away from the game has made me lose so much of the things that I've learned and acquired about the mental game, because I've been gone for so long. I've lost touch with that. And if anything, I've become more in touch with my human side, my emotional side, as a person. Like I got back to the States a few months ago and I started being immersed in poker again. And I found that like my tolerance for tilt is just so bad right now. Like I've never felt more human, like before when I was just grinding all the time before the pandemic, my whole life was poker. I was so numb, I've trained myself to become so numb to the beats because I was doing it day in, day out. Now I'm back on it. Like things just hurt. I feel the sting of like losing, and I've become like more emotional. I'm sure like through more mental awareness and things like that, I'll get back to the place where I was, but it definitely takes like a mental switch, like what happened with you. Like you just like, you know what, this is important to me and like I need to make a mindful change instead of just going down this path where you're just so caught up with your emotions and you're not doing anything to fix that.
I think you mentioned something really, really interesting and important there. You said you were numb to the emotions and now you're feeling your human side more.
Yes.
And you said you will get back to that place you were to before. And I would say it's possible to get even to a way better place, because what I try to teach people is not to become completely numb to their emotions, not become this emotionless robot, but instead acknowledge and feel your emotions, but not let them control your behavior. And I think that's a completely different and way healthier approach than trying to suppress your emotions, get rid of them, or become completely numb. In a vacuum, it might be better for making a poker decision to not feel an emotion right in that moment, but for life in general, you want to be able to feel your emotions. So even negative emotions can be used as a warning signal or as a signal to improve something, to work on something. And at the same time, you don't have to let them control your behavior.
I like that, Jan. It's not about suppressing it and not feeling those things. At the end of the day, we're still human, right? It's healthy to feel emotions, but then how do we recognize that we're feeling this, but then not let that affect our technical part of our game, the part of our brain that knows like what's the best way to play here, you know? Yeah, because I think when we're tilted, that part of the brain goes out the window. Like we still know that like this is probably not the best way to approach this, maybe this hand or this situation, but we just lose sight of that. We just throw it out and our emotions take over.
Yeah, exactly. When we're under stress, our logical brain just gets shut off because stress signals our body like fight or flight, survival mode. You don't need to think deeply about something. It's about surviving the current situation. And I think one big mistake that poker players tend to make is to massively overvalue logic and then criticize themselves for not being able to use that logic in a stressful moment. A very, very common sentence that I hear from my clients, for example, is, I know the right play, but I'm unable to make it in the moment. And they beat themselves up for that. And
I see.
Emotions are way stronger than logic. And if we're under stress, if we're tilted, if we've been on a bad run for a long time, emotions take over. Like the primitive part of our brain takes over, and all that logical knowledge that we possess goes out the window or is not accessible at that point. So I think most importantly, we need to be able to deal with our emotions and in a healthy way distance ourselves or separate our behavior from our emotions. Again, as I said, not get rid of them, but take a step back and say, okay, there's this emotion, but I'm still gonna focus on the right action, like separating the action from the emotion.
You know what's interesting, Jan, is like this concept of tilt and this emotional beast that we're talking about is a constant battle. No matter how long you've been playing poker, it affects everyone at some level, you know, and I think at varying degrees throughout their career, throughout the years. Because like for me, like my mindset in the beginning compared to now is like very different, right? But at the same time, I'll have my moments where I slip and I get into a very destructive mindset again. And I have to catch myself, you know? Like when I first started playing poker, I was extremely narrow-minded. I was very short-sighted, and I was the most entitled poker player you can think about. Like if I started with the best hand and somehow I lost by the river, I just felt like the world was out to get me. I felt like the unluckiest poker player ever. Throughout the years, I've been able to correct that logic and be able to deal with all the things I said above a lot better emotionally, but then it will still come out. When it goes unchecked, that ego comes out and those thoughts enter my head again. I still feel the same things that I felt 20 years ago when I first started playing poker, those same issues, those same feelings, which is just very fascinating when you think about it, because the human mind is so stubborn, right? Like you train yourself to think, okay, use logic, right? Diffuse the situation, okay? But then at these moments, they still resurface.
Yeah, I think it's a two-part process where you can logically work on these beliefs or on those underlying assumptions, like the entitlement, for example. But I think it's only the smaller part of the equation. The more important part is realizing that even though there's logical arguments against entitlement, these thoughts and anger will sometimes come up, especially if you keep moving up in stakes and if you always play for a significant amount.
Absolutely. I think like since I started till now, there's been moments where I'll have certain epiphanies that will make me realize like, okay, wait, maybe there's a better approach here, you know? And like, for example, I think one of the epiphanies I got was realizing that everybody gets the same cards in the long run. and realizing that the game, it's not after you. Like the second you stop taking the beats personally is when you start being able to deal with losing better. I realized that like one of the epiphanies was like, if, for me to survive in poker, I was absolutely gonna have to make a shift somewhere in my mindset in order to make it. Otherwise, I was just never gonna make it. I was just gonna burn out and self-destruct.
I think what's important to realize is, of course, everyone has these epiphanies throughout their career, but that doesn't always mean that they change their patterns or their habits right away. Like you have to have this epiphany again and again, and it might change your behavior for some time, then you fall back to old habits. And then a few weeks or a few months or even years later, you have that epiphany again. And often it takes a few times to finally click, where it becomes natural to not think a certain way anymore and always make the right decision. For example, maybe a similar thing would be like going to the gym. If you want to start going to the gym, you don't just decide one day, from now on, I'm always going to go to the gym. You will have ups and downs and setbacks. And at some point, it finally clicks and you realize how important working out is for you. And the same goes for all these poker epiphanies. Like it usually takes a few attempts until it finally becomes natural.
What a great analogy with the gym. Unfortunately for me, that's one of the hardest things for me is what you just said. Usually like I'll go to the gym for like a few weeks, even up to a few months, and then fall off and have to remind myself like, look, get back on it, fall off again. We're very stubborn as human beings. We need to be reminded of these things, and we need to insert that logic to ourselves. We need to catch ourselves.
Exactly. Almost any healthy, important habit takes a few attempts, and it was exactly the same for me when I neglected working out for a few years in my early 20s, and it took me, I would say, 3 or 4 years until it became completely natural again to always be active.
That's like the habit forming part of what we're discussing that really is important here, is the key, because it's easy for us to do it once and then fall off. But like, how do we form that into a habit where it's automatic? For example, let's say we're in a hand and maybe a couple more hands and it's going to set us off, or we're just going to start downward spiraling. How do we form that habit where we catch ourselves, make that mental adjustment, and then the next time we don't tilt as hard, right? And then we tilt a little bit less, forming that habit. I think it's really important.
Yeah, for sure. Reminding yourself again and again, and becoming better at recognizing when you're in autopilot modus, when you're just mindlessly following your old bad habits. And I think this is probably one of the biggest effects of meditation, is that you learn to take a step back and recognize, oh, I'm in autopilot modus right now. I'm doing what I've always been doing, but I actually want to question this approach. I want to question if this is the right decision.
I like that. I've read a lot of books that are either directly or loosely related to meditation. It all talks about that awareness, that second where you're talking about, where that's like the first step always, right? It's catching yourself and practicing awareness, where you're like almost looking at yourself from a third person. You see yourself, you catch yourself, and then once you're aware is like already when your mind makes that shift. Because when you're caught up in emotionally in a moment, you're not aware. You lose all awareness. You're like almost not yourself, right? You're just acting in that moment. But the second where you're like, okay, wait, hold on, it's 1 second here, right? Then that's when you're able to make that shift.
That's exactly what it is, actually. That third person view, or sometimes like the bird's view, or taking a step back, all these metaphors, they basically allow you to distance yourself from that current that is dragging you in a certain direction, like the emotions, the circumstances, the thoughts that are popping up in your head, like everything that stream of consciousness when you're not aware, like when you're not actively thinking about what is it that I really want to do. And that's something that we don't think of when we're stressed, when we're in that autopilot modus. We're thinking only about the thing ahead of us, the current hand, how we're angry, how we want to get back at that player. And we let what is right in front of us make our decision instead of our long-term goals.
Speaking of all this, I want to ask you, from your background as a psychologist now, and also you're a poker player, how do you feel with the mental game versus the technical game? What is the relative importance in the comparison here? The way I feel about it is like when you compete at the highest levels in poker with great players, the mental game to me is everything. Nowadays with all the resources, players are very competent and understand high level strategy. And at the end of the day, it almost becomes a game of your mind, right? Because if everybody's very technically sound, then who's going to have the edge if you're playing like either a very long tournament or if you're playing a very long session with these same players? I've always felt the mental is actually more important than the actual technical part of the game. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I would say one cannot replace the other, and I think you always have to take care of both aspects of the game. But I definitely agree, once you get to the highest level, the mental game has become even more important. But even if you are getting started, and if you want to take poker seriously, you should start working on your mental game right away, because it will always be important. There's many aspects of the game. Let's say you're starting at very low stakes, the money doesn't really matter to you, then there's still other aspects of the mental game that are important than just tilt control. Like, for example, being able to focus. That is really important regardless of what kind of money you're playing for. We use this term, the mental game of poker, but in reality, every one of these skills applies to every other area of life as well. Like, being able to deal with emotions is, of course, important for every area that you can think of, for your professional career, for your relationships, for anything basically. And being able to focus, or living healthy, having a good structure, a good schedule, healthy habits, all that stuff is of course important for every area of life. Also, of course, being confident in your technical game also of course helps you be more confident in your mental game at the table.
That's true. Yeah, for me, like, go back to saying like how a poker player is dealing with this idea of tilt for their entire career. It's a non-stop journey. It's just a constant battle with it. Like, over the years, the entitlement part has significantly faded away from me. Also, as I've gotten older, just naturally started to feel less entitled. But the ego just sometimes always gets in the way. It was the strongest when I was like in my 20s, and it was just like out of control. That was my biggest obstacle, was like my ego. And even like in the worst situations, because my ego is so strong and I did not want to admit defeat, it's always been like a double-edged sword for me, because sometimes it would be my worst enemy, but sometimes it would be my greatest strength. I would just keep going. So personally for me, like, that's been the pattern throughout the years. It's just this constant struggle with it.
And I think especially as you get older, I would say like the biggest factor of being able to deal with your ego, or taming your ego a little bit, is having other things in life that are important to you. Just like for you in my early 20s, like I was doing nothing but playing poker. It was all I did. I woke up in the morning, played the whole day, went back to bed. So of course, my ego and my confidence were massively dependent on the results in poker, because it was all I was doing. It was the only thing that was important to me. But in reality, of course, our ego or our confidence is dependent on much more than just performing in one area. Or if it does, it becomes really, really unhealthy. The same thing is very common amongst, for example, managers and entrepreneurs who do nothing but work on their business all day long. So all their self-worth becomes dependent on how well their company is doing. And that's a very common issue amongst poker players. But once you realize, okay, there's other areas in life that are important to me. Of course, there's your family, your friends, your other hobbies, your passions, education and other areas in poker and so on. There's so many other things that can become important to you. And if they help you relax, if they help you enjoy the part of your day where you don't play poker, of course, it makes your ego a little more stable.
Yeah, I think the word we're looking for is balance, maintaining that balance between your results in poker and everyday life outside of the game, making sure that, like you said, the results don't dictate your entire mood for the day or for the week or the month, like there's other things going on that are good in your life. And so when things don't go well in poker, you can fall back on other things that bring you back to reality and let you realize like it's not just the results, like there's other things, like it sucks to have a really bad session, but you got all these other things going on that are you have in your life that keep you balanced.
And I think also within poker, you can develop a more balanced approach where the results money-wise are not your only measurement of success. Of course, most of the poker pros I know, they are very competitive, and they are doing it also not only for the money, but also for the thrill and the challenge and the competition. But there's other things other than the money you can use to measure your success, and you can learn to focus more on those. For example, what I really started enjoying at some point late in my career, or where developed like that attitude that this is important and this can be enjoyable as well, is that focus. Playing fewer tables, but really focusing on every decision, thinking deeply about them, not being distracted, forgetting everything around you, only thinking about the current hand. That's, for example, a small challenge that you can set for yourself, is to stay focused as long as possible. And if you're able to do that well, and as you start getting better, this is another source of confidence, another source of positive feedback and success, where you can pat yourself on the back at the end of the session and say, wow, even though I didn't run well, even though the money result is not that great, I was really, really focused. I was in the zone.
I think you made a key point there also. Again, it's like slowing down and focusing on the decision and being proud of the decision you're making. I think it's tough because as humans, we all want things now and quick and fast, right? Like, I think that's
we want a fast, flashy result. Yeah.
Yes, and I don't know if you ever had any problems like outside of poker for gambling, like, you know, with other table games and things like that. And that's where they get you, is that quick rush and feeling. Like, there's no logic there. There's no focus, right? You're just pushing, you're winning, you're losing, and you just get those chemical, that feeling, right? That rush. And that's what people play those games for. It happens even in poker. For example, like if I'm playing in a certain stakes, and especially if I'm losing, I just want the stakes to be bigger and bigger and bigger and faster. Like, I just want it to be less players and faster, you know? And I've completely lost sight of like everything that you just talked about, which is like slow down, focus, try to make a good logical decision every hand rather than just being impatient.
Yeah, that's a very common issue amongst players at pretty much any level, whether it's the recreational players or the professionals. Like, almost everyone I know, including myself, took shots at stakes that we shouldn't be playing, because we want that quick rush, that fast result. We want to get the money back as quickly as possible. The solution is what we just talked about: finding gratification, finding success, and finding something to be proud of in other things than just the money results. Focusing is just one example. There's so many different, less obvious challenges that you can set for yourself. It could be concentrating, it could be, for example, developing the habit of quitting at the right point, taking a minute, taking a breath and asking yourself, is this the point where I really should quit?
So much easier said than done, right? For so many people, like, we know, like, okay, we should probably quit, like, let's play a couple more orbits, like, you know, what could go wrong? Back to the word tilt, can we talk a little bit about your take on the psychological reasoning behind tilt? Like, what causes it? Because I feel like once players are able to understand tilt more, then they're able to combat it a little bit more, right? What is your take on that?
I would say there's many different reasons for tilt. I would say one big reason is we like to be in control. We want to predict outcomes, and we want to feel in control of our lives and the things that are happening to us. That's called self-efficacy, which is a really important factor of a happy life and a healthy life, to feel like your effort, the energy you put out, the hard work you do is worth something. If you work hard, you will achieve positive results. And that, of course, is not always true in poker. And the variance is so crazy, and we are not really good at understanding how crazy the variance of poker sometimes is. So we often feel like we're not in control. The flip side would be learned helplessness. Like, if again and again you work hard, you try again and again, and you still get a bad result, you're learning helplessness. It's all for nothing. It's not worth it. No matter how hard you try, you always get a bad result. And that is, of course, exactly what happens in a downswing or in a bad session. You're making the right decision, you're not getting the result you want. And that can make us feel really helpless and desperate. And I think that's one of the biggest reasons for tilt.
Like you said, the expectation and then the result, the disappointment, right? The incongruency there is what starts to breed that frustration inside. You do something, you expect a certain result, and then you get disappointed from the result. Yeah.
And what you can do there, again, for one, of course, like the logical side, is learning to understand the variance of poker, realizing and telling yourself again and again, the variance is so crazy, my brain is not able to deal with it. And that's just fine. It's something that I have to accept and that is not under my control.
I think that it takes a mental shift there to really tell yourself, I'm going to let go a little bit, I'm going to do the things that I can control. And then the part of the game that I can't control, just like emotionally let go of that.
Yeah, letting go is exactly the right term. There's so many things in life we cannot control. And the variance in poker is, of course, something that we cannot control. But you can learn to focus more on the things that you can control, like your decision making, the time you're playing, the games you're selecting, how much you're studying. So there is a lot of things in poker that you are in control of, but they are not as obvious and again, not so quickly rewarding. It's all a long-term game. Of course, you can stay up all night and raise the stakes and hope the weaker players get tilted or that you somehow get lucky. Of course, you can focus on that, but that's not as likely to help you in the long run.
You mentioned the weaker players. That reminds me of a point that I want to make back to what causes tilt. I think a lot of that is like our beliefs, right? A lot of times for me personally, if I get tilted, it's like my certain beliefs about certain players. Let's say, for example, I consider them to be weaker or like less experienced, right? And then in a situation where if I lose to them, that may go back and hurt my ego, right? And then so I may tilt because my perception is that, why am I in this situation losing? So I think if I'm able to change my beliefs a little bit, change my perspective, then that will alter my behavior. And like you said, focusing on what you can't control, which is what's going on internally, right? And then once you get a hold of that, then you're able to lessen the intensity in those moments when, for example, something like that happens. You lose to someone that is less experienced in the game.
Yeah, definitely. Of course, the ego is a big part of what causes tilt as well. And similar to like thoughts or emotions, you can learn to take a step back from your self-image. Even more importantly, you can ask yourself, is it helpful? If I think of myself as way superior to that other player, does this belief help me make good decisions?
Right.
That's, I think, the more important question to ask yourself.
Jan, I feel like a lot of players are naturally better than others doing all this stuff, but I'm sure you're a big believer in the fact that anybody that is willing to help themselves is able to really progress in handling tilt. And, so like, cause for me, like, I believe that even for myself, I'm not exactly the best candidate to naturally be able to deal with all this, like I told you, in like my 2 decades of playing poker, it's been a constant battle, but I'm sure you've had many clients where they've been like me and they've struggled and they've progressively gone to the point where they're able to really improve on so many levels mentally, But yeah, like I look at some players and it definitely feels to me like some players are just naturally built for this stuff and some players are not. Some people just fall apart, right? And so, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, there's definitely big differences between certain players, but what we mostly think of as natural, I would say, is simply that they started way earlier, that they have more experience and have been working on these things for a longer time. Because depending on your upbringing, on your education, on your circumstances and the people around you, you just start learning at an earlier age than other people do. And that's something important to keep in mind. Don't compare yourself to others because you don't know when they started, you don't know how they started. You also don't know if they really never tilt or if it only looks like that on stream or on TV. Compare yourself to yourself the day before or a week before or a year before and be proud of the progress you've made compared to previous times. Yeah, but it definitely is possible to make huge changes regardless of when you started. In the short run, less will happen than you would like, but in the long run, much more will happen than you can even imagine. Regardless how old you are, regardless for how long you've been struggling with the mental game, the best point to start is always right now.
Yeah, I like that. And I also like your explanation on not comparing yourself to others, because the way I see it now is like try to have a more mature outlook on the game, which is, like you said, not so much your battle with others on the table. Yes, it is a game with other people and you're trying to win, but at the end of the day, a lot of it is the battle with yourself, right? It's the internal battle. Really, if we look back at some of the worst sessions, right, a lot of it is like, yes, maybe we're facing very tough opponents, put in very tough situations, but a lot of it is like we are to blame for ourselves, right? For a lot of the mistakes that we made. A lot of times we're going against our own logic and we're our own worst enemy in these situations. So I definitely agree with you there.
Yeah, yeah. And you can turn from like your own worst enemy, you can become your own best friend. Like we always tend to criticize ourselves the harshest. And I think for everything we talked about, whatever you want to improve, it helps a lot to become more friendly with yourself and more understanding for all the mistakes you've made, all the failures you've had, all the stuff that didn't go as you would have liked. Being understanding and being more friendly about it helps you to become better in the future. Because basically what it is, this inner battle and criticizing yourself is a waste of energy and time. It takes away energy, takes away motivation, takes away from the things that you want to do in the future, from the things you want to improve. So think of self-improvement and bettering yourself as like a friendly competition, like a friendly game of ball with your best friend, and not as a super serious life or death battle with somebody that you hate.
Right, forgiving yourself for mistakes, and just as long as you're trying to improve on it, using
exactly.
that approach.
Be this strict but friendly teacher, basically. And another thing about this thought of competition is, don't see other people who are ahead of you in terms of poker knowledge or the mental game as opponents, as enemies, but instead see them like somebody you can compete with in a friendly way and that you can help each other as well. Like one really important aspect of my mental game coaching and our mentoring program, where we combine mental game coaching and strategy coaching, is forming a peer group of people. Some of them, they play in the same games. So of course they play against each other, trying to take each other's money. But at the same time, they support each other, they help each other. And that just makes the progress much more fun and easier at the same time. So I think it's a win-win situation.
Interesting. You guys basically create like a small community where everybody's trying to better themselves, have a common goal and helping each other through that. I like that.
Yeah, if I was to give one effective, most simple tip I can give people is, don't try alone. Get help. It doesn't even have to be paid help. It can just be reaching out to other players. Doing everything in the group is so much easier and so much more fun than trying all that stuff alone. So yeah, if that's something that people are interested in, they can reach out to me either on my website or on my Instagram.
Yeah, it was a great talk, Jan. I'll definitely be looking back on our podcast myself, I'm sure, time to time, to go back and remind myself of all things we talked about, because like we discussed, it's just an ongoing journey. Like you will never be at a finish line where you've reached all your goals, but that's not that important. You don't have to reach that finish line. What is important is that you learn to enjoy the process of it. And yeah, thank you for having me. All right, guys, that's it for today, and thanks for watching.